All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Yuno Learning. So, in our series for webinars that we have started for you, today we bring you the third session for IELTS Speaking, the part 3. So, we'll be covering what answers, what questions are being asked for you in your IELTS part 3, and how you can answer and even expand your answers so that you can meet the desired amount of numbers, desired amount of words that need to be spoken for the answer. Let's start. So before we move, let's have a quick overview of what happens during your IELTS exam. So there are 3 parts in your exams. We've already discussed part 1 and part 2 in our previous webinars. Just to give you an overview of how things are conducted, in part 1, the questions are essentially about you. So it lasts from 4 to 5 minutes, and the examiner may ask you 8 to 10 questions about your work, what kind of your qualifications and your accommodation, anything that is related to you. It will also be your points. Part 2, monologue. So here you're given a cue card wherein you have 2 to 3 cues which you have to speak for at least 2 minutes. You're given 60 seconds to prepare your cue card and then you have to elaborate it for 2 minutes. All right. Part 3, abstract questions. So today we'll be discussing how to answer the abstract questions. Now, what are abstract questions? So abstract questions are not very objective questions, right? They are not questions about you, or they're not very fact-based questions, but these are questions that require a little bit of more thinking and need you to answer them in a particular. These questions are generally related to your part 2 questions. So whatever cue card you're given in part 2, you will have abstract questions related to the same. The examiner will ask 3 to 4 questions, which will be around that particular. Let's move on to the criteria for assessment. What is the criteria for the assessment of your speaking test? Number 1, fluency and coherence. What is the pace that you're going on? If you're stuttering in between, if you're using so many fillers, and coherence, if your answers are logically structured, like you can understand when you're transitioning from one thing to another. There's a very smooth transition by using signpost language or maybe linkers at places. For example, you can use linkers such as, however, since, on one hand, on the other hand. So these are all the linkers and signposting that you can do in your language to show fluency and coherence. Next is lexical resource. Once again, what does lexical resource mean? If you have attended previous webinars, you will remember that lexical resource is nothing but your vocabulary. So the words that you use, but not just words, it is not limited to your fancy words that you can incorporate, but it is also about idioms, collocations, phrasal verbs, and other, vocabulary that you can use to show that the command of your, or the show your repository of words. Number 3, grammatical range and accuracy. So grammatical range is what accuracy. Let's come to accuracy first. So grammatical accuracy is how accurate your grammar is. If your punctuation is correct, if your answers are grammatically sound, like the subject-verb agreement is correct or not. Grammatical range, on the other hand, is the kind of tenses that you're using in your answer. Like what is the range? If you're using multiple sentence structures to answer, if you're using different tenses, for example, if the question has been asked for something about your, from the time of your, let's say, childhood, then you're using past tense. And if it is about a future plan that you might have in 2 to 3 years, then it would be. Number 4, pronunciation. So once again, remember that pronunciation is different from what we know as accent. Accent is basically what kind of dialect are you. There are multiple accents in American, which is not essentially important for your speaking. You need not to have an accent, but yes, your pronunciation should be correct. You should pronounce the words correctly. For example, accept. It's not accept. A lot of people have heard they pronounce the word wrong. These are few major, basic things that you need to keep in mind. And for example, then there's read and write. Even though both are spelled the same, they are spoken different when you change the tense. So these are very basic things that you need to keep in mind that show the whole of your language and are very essential for your criteria or for your assessment of. Let's see. So I am speaking part 3. So as we already discussed, that your speaking part 3 has abstract questions which are most likely related to the part 2 question that has been answered. Now, how do you answer them? So you answer them in 4 to 5 sentences, and these have to be elaborated, expanded. Shouldn't be very short as part 1 questions where we talked about you, your personal life, and it shouldn't be as long as your part 2 Q part. It shouldn't be a 2-minute long answer. So this has to be somewhere in between. You have to choose a middle ground where you speak at least 4 to 5 sentences, and you can expand them. You can use multiple idioms, vocabulary, similarly that we did in part 2, and you can try to answer these questions. All right. So the strategy to answer IELTS speaking part 3. The first thing that we discussed is answer in 4 to 5 sentences. So there's no word limit or sentence limit in these answers, but always make sure that you expand it appropriately. Like the why part of the question should always be answered. It shouldn't be incomplete, that you're just stopping after saying speaking 2 to 3 sentences. Should expand it properly. And if you exceed the required or the minimum amount of words required for you, the examiner will stop you in between. Do not fear that. It is fine. The examiner will let you know, and then you can move on to the next question. Next, include linkers. You can use a lot of linkers in between. For example, furthermore, moreover, if you need to add a point. Then you can use, on the other hand, on the flip side, contrastingly. So these are all used when you want to draw a comparison between two things. Like when you're saying two different things, opposite things, that's when you can use them. If you want to add some examples, you can talk about for, because, since. And if you have to give substance, speculate, you might say maybe, would, I guess. So these are the linkers that you can use in between. Draw comparisons wherever needed. So while you are giving your answer, you can also draw comparisons. So some questions would be like, do Indians like to read more books or watch movies? So you can draw comparisons that even though a lot of people are fond of reading, there's a habit, there's a particular regular habit of people reading newspapers in the morning. But at the same time, or meanwhile, a lot of people are also very intrigued by the latest developments in the cinema. So they are very fond of the movies that are presently or currently playing in the cinema. This is how you can draw comparisons wherever it is required. Modulate your voice. Now, this is what I keep stressing upon in a lot of the classes, that voice modulation is also very important. This is generally overlooked upon because this is not some sort of very objective strategy, how to expand your answers, but modulating your voice is equally important. Because a lot of times your tone can go monotonous if you keep speaking at the same pitch, the same volume, and do not stress any particular emotion. So whenever you're having a conversation, and I am assessing as examiner, I'm assessing that how able you are to express your thoughts, emotions, that in that particular instance, I also see that how you can stress different parts of your speech. If you are excited about that something, you stress that in a particular manner. If there's some objective answer that you're giving, you keep it a little monotone. So these are different ways you can modulate your voice while giving your answer. And then while there are certain words which require stress within them. So certain words, multi-syllable words, have multi-parts between them that need different stressing level so that it can be, of course, it shows that you have a good command of the language, but it also enhances the clarity of your voice so that the examiner can understand you better and your voice is just not monotone or monotonous for them to listen. Next, include one or two idioms. So just like part 1 and just like part 2, include 1 or 2 idioms in between. That shows again how your lexical resource and the command over the language. Next, use the correct tense. Now, this is again very important. So, remember in the last part 2, we talked about the toy that you owned in your childhood. So, you're talking about the childhood. You'll be expressing the instances that took place, let's say 15 to 20 years ago. So you'll be using the past tense. And if you're connecting that to something in the present that maybe you still have that thing, that's when you shift to present tense. And in future, if somebody asks you about your plans, your IELTS, let's say, you can use future tense. So always make sure that you understand, you comprehend the time period that is to be used or that is given in your question, and then you use the correct tense. Be expressive. Focus on your facial expressions. Now, all of this is very important, but expression is also very important. So focus on your facial expressions. What kind of expressions? You should not have a frown on your face. You should not make it look that you're very tensed while giving your answers. Make it look like it's very easy going for you. It comes naturally. Right? So these are the few things that you keep in mind. Now, one of the things that sometimes my students ask me is, ma'am, how to expand the answers? Like they'll stop after 2 to 3 sentences and then they'll ask me, ma'am, I can't think anything else about this answer. So there are 4 things that you can do in this instance. Number 1, you can give reasons. If there's a question that is asked to you, that what kind of festivals are celebrated in your country. So you can go ahead and give reasons for your answer, that why they celebrate those festivals, like because it promotes the togetherness, brings together the families, and gives you a break from your hectic work schedule. You can focus on the reason, and you can use linkers for them, for, because, since. These are the few words that you can use while you're giving reasons. Number 2, add examples. So when you add, whenever you're out of, let's say, content, you can add examples from your own life or from somebody else's life, some incident, some anecdote that happened. So you can use those words. And what words can you use while you're giving examples? You can use, for example, for instance. So these are the things that we can deploy while we are expanding answers by giving examples. Then we can also talk about contrasting ideas. So you can also make 2 different ideas. Okay, you can first talk about, let's say, one particular idea, and then you contrast it with the other, so that you can expand your answer. And what kind of linkers will you use then? On the contrary, on the flip side, on the other hand, however. And lastly, you can also speculate. Speculate by saying that there could be some incidents that you can think about that may or might happen. So the words that you can use while then would be maybe, could be, I guess. So this is how you can expand your. Now let's move on to further. So this was the part 2 cue card that we covered in the previous session. So cue card was, talk about the toy you liked playing with as a child. Please tell me what it was, when you got it, gave it to you. So this was the cue card that we used last time. Now think of this cue card and think of what kind of questions can you expect. Take a minute, see what kind of questions that are related to this topic that you can be asked in speaking. Alright. So the questions that can be asked to you, number 1 is, why do you still remember that toy? So this is, again, as you can see, this question is relevant to your cue card. It will always be like that. If the cue card was on, let's say, some trip you went on, then the question could be, why do you still remember that trip? It will always be relevant. So let's look at this answer. Unlike most other parents, my parents gifted me toys on rare occasions, as they felt that it should not be spoiled and should always learn to learn. So in the beginning, we start unlike. So we draw a comparison, right? Like most people do this, but my parents used to do this. So in the very first line, we have drawn a comparison. So unlike most other parents, my parents gifted me toys on rare occasions as they felt. So we've written as they felt. This is a reasoning that we are giving now. So I've expanded the sentence that my parents gave me gift only on rare occasions. Why? Because they felt it shouldn't be spoiled and I should learn to value it. In the very first sentence, I have deployed multiple tools to expand and show my lexical ability. See, In the very first sentence, the linker unlike shows that I'm drawing a comparison. Then the comma part shows that this is a complex sentence. And then when I move on to the part that my parents gifted me a rare toys only on rare occasion, I give a reason side by side that they felt I should be. Next, therefore. So when I say therefore, that is a consequence, that is the result of this. When I got this fur cat, so remember in the previous class, the toy we talked about was fur cat. So we are referring it to here again. I remember I was over the moon. So when I say over the moon and would spend the entire day with it, this is why I still have it so fresh in my memory. So when I say over the moon means that you were extremely happy. In the last cue card, we used the idiom a kid in the candy store. That means an extremely happy kid. Now I used another version of it over the moon. So that is why it is important for you to have multiple idioms in your, in your box so that you can use them and without repeating them. Here, I also use a phrase in between that shows that my the range of sentences I can use there. Next, at that time, so instead of just starting with the sentence we were made to learn to play with limited toys, I start with at that time, a way to signpost my language and transition from another point. We were made to learn to play with limited toys, unlike the children of today who have a room full of playthings. So see, what I did here is, number one, I used a signpost language. Then carefully look at the tense usage. We were made, I used the past tense correctly. And then I changed the word toy with, instead of saying toy again and again, I use a synonym. Then I'm adding a sentence with also. Also, we were taught to respect our belongings, no matter. And now I'm giving an example. So I want to expand my answer. So I give an example by saying, for instance, apart from this fur cat, I hardly remember any other soft toy that I possessed at the time. So it is not a very ordinary thing. This is how I've tried to answer this question. See, whenever the answer that I've chosen, since it is in past, I have made sure that I use both the tenses, past and present, correctly. When I'm talking about past incidents, I use the past tense. But when I talk about why do I still remember it in today's date, I switch to present. So, all right. Let's move on to the next question. Should parents consider before buying toys for their children? So again, another question. And see, now this is not a very objective question. This is not something that you can point out some certain facts that you have to think about it a bit. That why should parents consider them? This is something that you need to rack your brains a little bit so that you can get to the abstract reasons that why does this happen. Let's start this answer. So I've started this by, instead of just simply starting this, some students in my class, when I ask them a question, directly move to the answer. In the beginning, just give a generic statement so that you get started, right? Can't just simply say that majorly parents like this. No. Start with, I believe that age and safety are the most crucial factors that parents keep in mind while buying toys for their young ones. So parents keep in mind, that means parents give a thought about while buying toys for their young ones. So I changed the word children with young ones. This is how I paraphrase the question also. And I also add that what are the reasons? Age and safety are the factors that parents keep in mind. Then I'm adding a sentence, so I'll use the word moreover. They also arrange for toys that keep children focused. So this is how I add another. For instance, now I'm adding an example by starting with for instance. You can also use other linkers in place of this, for example, to substantiate so that we don't repeat it again and again. But this is also, many working parents look for productive toys that can keep their words glued to them instead of spending time on screens. So again, I have changed the word words or parents with words. And when I say glued to them, that means you're with the toys with the technology 24/7 instead of spending time on screens. Then, now I'm trying to explain this. So I use the linker to explain. I have noticed that these days, working mothers do not want their children to watch TV all day. So they make it a point to order productive toys for them. This is where I first put an instance, I put an example, and then I explain that this is what I learned from this. To illustrate, that's another linker for your example. One of my friends who work as a digital marketing professional buys toys like fish catching, jungle animal sets, stacking toys, chess, doctor, and kitchen sets. So this is one way. Remember when I talked about that you can also add an and anecdote from your life or from your somebody that you know. So this is one anecdote that you can add. That sometimes you can add that, oh, I remember one of my friends used to do this, or one of my uncle or aunt, my relatives had this in mind, and then you can add that in your sentence. So before I move ahead, I see there's a query here. What is the difference? Like I say, like the bag that has color, or I like the bag. Okay. So you're asking the difference between that and which. Alright. So I'll just Lilac, I'll just come to that very shortly. Before I'll just move to this question, and then we'll come back to the query that you asked. Alright. So the next question is, apart from toys, what other household items do children usually play with? Now again, this is the question that has no very this question does not have any rigid answer. This will depend on person to person, what you think about it. So take a minute, think about your answers before I read you out the answer that we have written here. So in your head, just frame out certain points. What do you think these days children have in their house apart from these toys or playthings that they can use to play with? Right. So let's answer this question. Children love to play with several things at home, such as cushions, pillows, boxes, or even fiber cups and mats. So you start the question by paraphrasing whatever it was given to you. Children love to play with several things, and then I mentioned such as whenever you want to give example, you can use such. We talk about cushions, pillows, boxes. Then I want to add a point. So additionally, young ones love to play with dough and make various shapes of words or with it. This helps them to learn to identify shapes easily and also keeps them busy for a long time. So see, when I'm adding an example here that, oh, young people like to do this, I'm also explaining that why do they do this? So, and what is the benefit of this? So again, whenever you are adding some examples to your answers or some instances or anecdotes, you can always explain or link them to certain explanation that why is this happening. Just like in the previous answer, we explained one of the example that we gave. So we can also explain what is the ultimate result of this thing. So this is how you can expand your answers. Correct. Why do parents buy toys for their children? So once again, take a minute, think about this question, and see how would you answer this question? Or think of any anecdotes in your life, or some people, or some parents that buy their toys. Think of why do they do it, and see what you can. How would you like to answer? All right, so let's look at this answer. I think parents mostly aim to keep their children engaged and involved in play activities while purchasing toys for them. So instead of stating exactly that parents mostly do this, you add a little bit of personal touch to it, that I think in my in your belief, parents mostly buy this so that they can keep their children engaged and involved in play activities. Also, small children are so creative that parents buy them coloring kits, building blocks, or puzzles, which help to nurture the creativity of. So I added a point using also, and then I'm explaining also that small children are so creative, that they're so creative that parents buy them the blocks and puzzles. Which what is the result of this now? Which helps them to nurture the creativity of smaller ones. So when you structure your sentence in such a manner that you give the reason, then you give the action, and then you give the consequence of it also, it very beautifully structures your answer, wherein the examiner is fulfilled. Like no part of the answer is unanswered. Like I will not ask you why, what, where. So you've answered all of these questions in a very logical. Nowadays, that is one way you can signpost your language. Working parents always find items such as storybooks, chessboards, building blocks, and games which involve identifying names of animals, birds, etc., which keep their small ones away from. So this tells them which involves identifying names of animals and birds, etc., and this keeps them away from their screen. Now let's come back to the question that the person asked in the chat box. So they asked about how to differentiate between that and which. So why did I wait till this point? So in this particular slide, you can see that in the answer I've written games which involve identifying name of animals, birds, and etc. So if you know the correct usage of which and that, you will notice that there's a small alteration that I can make here. So instead of writing this sentence here this way, I can write I'm starting after games and games that involve identifying names of animals which keep their away. Correct. So, right. So if you look at the sentence, this will give you the entire clarity of the difference between that and which. So whenever I'm using that, I am pointing to a particular object. So what is the object here? The objects that I'm using here is, so the objects that we're talking about here are games. So these games or building blocks. So I'm referring to these objects, and then I say these objects involve identifying names of animals. So whenever you have to directly refer to a thing, directly refer to the object that is in your sentence, you use that. And then if you have to add additional information, you use which. So when I added additional information, I used which keep the small ones away from schools. So this is how, this is the difference between that and which. So let me look at the query that I was asked once again. So they had given an example. So yes, what is the difference between, like I say, I like the bag. All right. So the difference between the two is when I say that is gives me that always gives me the direct information about the object that I'm talking about, while which gives me extra information. So these are the only differences that you have to keep in mind. I hope I made myself clear. So whosoever query it was, if you could just let me know in the chat box, it would be great that you understood what I'm trying to tell you. All right. So let's move on. Yes. So that would be the end of the webinar today. for more such interactive sessions and content, and so that you do not miss any reminders for any other webinars like part 1 and part 2 speaking, please subscribe to the channel so that you can follow our series thoroughly. Moreover, we also provide you the IELTS classes for more thorough understanding. If you're struggling with particular part of speaking part and you need constant feedback and monitoring that tracks your progress, you can enroll, visit our website, look at our classes, the structure, and more. You will even find more resources that we provide for the speaking. You can visit this website or call us at this number. Now, before I end this session, I will wait if you have any other queries regarding what I discussed today or anything related to IELTS speaking part 2 or any other queries, just like one that was asked in the chat. So if you have any queries, do let me know. I'll wait for them and then. Go ahead and ask your questions. I'll be happy to answer them. Whatever you feel that you might need to know about this exam or anything that we covered in the session today, any word that you did not understand, I'd be really happy to make sure that you get the answer for it. All right, so I'm guessing there are no queries, but thank you so much for attending. We'll see you for more such webinars and more such sessions. Uh, we love to have your queries. If any other, you can contact us. Thank you so much for attending. We'll see you.